Have you ever felt like the way we connect with the world has just fundamentally shifted lately? Well, welcome to this explainer on the wiring of a digital generation. We're going to unpack some fascinating research showing how digital technology isn't just a handy tool we use anymore. It's actually rewiring human development. It's altering our brain chemistry and completely transforming our physical relationships. If you've ever felt a little disconnected lately, well, the research we're looking at today proves that you are absolutely right.
To really ground this massive shift, consider a conversation that child advocacy expert Richard Louv had with a fourth grader. The kid actually told him, "I like to play indoors better because that's where all the electrical outlets are." It's kind of funny, right? But man, it's also incredibly tragic. It just brilliantly illustrates how our baseline for childhood, and really human interaction in general, has completely moved from the physical environment right into the digital one.
And that shift brings us to a pretty staggering number, 9. According to presentations from educational psychologists, 9 is the number of hours of daily screen time currently averaged by Generation Alpha. Think about that for a second. 9 hours a day. We aren't just talking about a little extra television after school. We are talking about what honestly feels like modern digital confinement.
So, here is our roadmap for today's explainer. First, the generational tech divide. 2. Gen Alpha's screen reality. 3. The rise of phubbing. 4. Nature deficit disorder. And finally, number 5, reclaiming our connections.
Let's dive right into Section 1, the generational tech divide, tracing the timeline of societal shifts.
Social psychologist Jean Twenge points out something super interesting. She argues that technology, not just the passage of time, is actually what's driving generational differences. As technology advances, from better healthcare all the way to the internet, our life stages stretch out. Back in the 1970s, people hit traditional adult milestones pretty quickly. Then by the 2000s, we see this rise in individualism and a heavy focus on the self. And today, we're seeing what Twenge calls the slow life strategy. Basically, kids and young adults are taking much longer to grow up, to get married, and to achieve independence. Development has literally slowed down at every single stage, and it's intricately tied to our technological environment.
Okay, moving on to Section 2, Gen Alpha's screen reality, zooming in on the developing brain.
Let's zoom in specifically on Generation Alpha. These are the kids born roughly between 2010 and 2024, literally the very first cohort to never know a world without screens. And we are seeing some real, tangible fallout. As highlighted by school division psychologists Greg and Mary Lou Goddard, there's actually 30% less physical activity right now compared to previous generations. Plus, there's unprecedented cyberbullying. We're also seeing a diminished use of the brain's frontal lobe, which is basically the pilot's cabin of executive functioning, meaning severe drops in attention span. And because algorithms provide instant feedback, we're seeing a really stark inability to delay gratification.
Now, this constant digital immersion doesn't just affect behavior, it affects the physical body, particularly sleep. Thrilling media like movies, video games, and those endlessly curated algorithmic feeds are designed to arouse your sympathetic nervous system. They trigger a fight or flight alert state, which completely spikes your cortisol. Because of this, the parasympathetic nervous system, the one that actually calms you down, is severely delayed. So what's the result? A developing brain gets completely robbed of the deep, restorative REM sleep it desperately needs to even function the next day. And the long-term cognitive consequences? They are just as stark. There's this longitudinal data from Quebec that observed child development, and they found that just 1 extra hour of passive TV viewing at age 2 resulted in a 7% decrease in class participation and a 6% decrease in math proficiency later on in life. So early passive viewing is literally training the developing brain to mind wander. It makes it incredibly difficult to pull focus back to reality later on.
Which brings us to Section 3, the rise of phubbing, the reconfiguration of social bonds.
So if we zoom out slightly from the individual brain to our interpersonal relationships, well, you've probably experienced this, or let's be honest, done it yourself. It's called phubbing, or phone snubbing. It's when you ignore the people you're with to pay attention to your phone. Anthropologist Hesley Machado Silva's research highlights this as a profound change in our social dynamics. It's really not just a rude habit anymore. It's an actual transfer of intimacy. Parents and peers alike are withdrawing their attention from the physical room and just giving it entirely to digital devices. Studies even show that infants whose parents frequently use smartphones during direct interactions actually exhibit lower emotional responsiveness and delayed language development.
And this brings us to the ultimate paradox of digital intimacy. On one hand, virtual connections offer incredible quantity. We can maintain thousands of contacts, but they're often super superficial and algorithmically driven, lacking real physical cues. Face-to-face relationships, on the flip side, are where deep quality is forged. They rely heavily on body language, nonverbal cues, and eye contact to really build empathy and trust. Silva's work warns us that replacing the face-to-face with the virtual creates a generation suffering from what he calls connectivity fatigue. We are exhausted by constant digital contact, yet somehow entirely lonely.
Let's look at Section 4, Nature Deficit Disorder, disconnecting from the physical world.
So how exactly has all this digital wiring affected our relationship with the world outside our front door? Child advocacy expert Richard Louv coined a term that perfectly captures our current era, nature deficit disorder. Now, he's very clear that this isn't an official medical diagnosis. Instead, it's a profound description of the human costs of our alienation from nature. When kids stop going outside, we see rising rates of ADD, obesity, and a real loss of what psychologists call transcendence. You know, those vital moments of awe and wonder that light up completely unique parts of the human brain?
I want you to really think about this question for a second. What happens when we lose the messy edges of childhood? Louv points out that unstructured, risky play, stuff like climbing trees, navigating a creek, or building a fort in the mud, is exactly what builds human resilience, caution, and curiosity. But today, driven by this media-fueled fear of strangers, traffic, and of course the totally irresistible pull of screens, those messy edges have been completely sanitized into digital pixels.
Louv's research reveals a pretty stark comparison here. Back in the 1970s, children had a broad roaming radius for independent exploration, and they could easily identify native ecology like local beetles and oak trees. But today, that physical roaming radius has shrunk to literally 1/9 the size it used to be. And instead of identifying local wildlife, an average 8-year-old is much better at identifying corporate cartoon characters. Our physical world is rapidly shrinking right as our digital one expands.
Finally, we arrive at Section 5, Reclaiming Our Connections, Evidence-Based Solutions.
The great news here is that we absolutely do not have to just accept this digital confinement. We can actively push back. Drawing from all the experts we've explored today, here is an actionable roadmap. Step 1. Intentional disconnection. Anthropologists highly suggest actively planning tech-free times to rebuild that face-to-face empathy and combat phubbing. Step 2. Unstructured nature play. You don't need to organize a formal educational hike or anything. Just get kids and, honestly, yourself out into the backyard, into the mud, into the messy edges to spark that frontal lobe and restore attention. And Step 3. Phone-free bedrooms. Protect the developing brain's REM sleep and cortisol levels by keeping screens out of the sleeping environment entirely.
The research is crystal clear on this. Technology is a fantastic tool, but it makes an absolutely terrible master. We know exactly how it rewires the brain, stifles our empathy, and shrinks our physical world. So I'll leave you with this final thought. Will we let screens write our story, or will we step outside and reclaim our connections? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking questions, keep looking up, and I will see you next time.